Thank you for choosing NewsDecoded, the community where curiosity meets clarity. If anything in tonight's report sparks a thought, a question, or a healthy challenge, tap the like, share your insight in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss the conversation. We decode the headlines together because truth is rarely simple, but it should always be accessible. Tonight's deep dive centers on the latest attempt in Congress to pry open the still-sealed trove of evidence tied to the late financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, a man whose network of power, money, and manipulation continues to cast a long shadow nearly 6 years after his death. Despite bipartisan vows to illuminate every corner of the case, the government's handling of critical files and potential co-conspirator names remains at best opaque and, at worst, actively obstructed. In a vote that came down to a single seat, the House once again shut the door on even debating whether the Department of Justice must disclose what it knows. That razor-thin margin has reignited public frustration, amplified political finger-pointing, and raised new questions about whether any meaningful accountability will ever reach the people whose names allegedly sit on those infamous flight logs. To understand the stakes, let's rewind. In 2005, police in Palm Beach, Florida, began investigating Epstein after multiple minors said they had been recruited to perform massages that became sexual assaults. 3 years later, federal prosecutors negotiated a controversial non-prosecution agreement. It shielded Epstein from the most serious charges and preemptively blocked potential federal cases against unnamed co-conspirators. Many victims and legal scholars still call that deal one of the most egregious sweetheart arrangements in modern American jurisprudence. In 2019, spurred by investigative journalism, civil suits, and relentless victim testimony, federal agents finally arrested Epstein on sex trafficking charges. He died in a Manhattan jail cell 6 weeks later. Officially, the cause was ruled suicide, but persistent security lapses and missing surveillance footage fueled widespread suspicion, and the enduring phrase, "Epstein didn't kill himself." The critical unresolved question is whom exactly Epstein facilitated and enabled. Flight manifests from his private jets list celebrities, academics, political donors, foreign dignitaries, and heads of state. His little St. James Island in the U.S. Virgin Islands hosted gatherings cloaked in secrecy. Victims describe a pipeline of grooming that spanned continents, aided by socialites, talent scouts, and employees whose roles in the abuse remain under sealed court exhibits. In 2019, both Democratic and Republican lawmakers publicly promised voters that sunlight was coming. Among them was then-President Donald Trump, who said he would make any and all Epstein files public so that justice can finally be served. Other officials echoed that pledge, or at minimum, vowed to support legislation compelling disclosure. Fast forward to this week. Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona introduced an amendment to a larger financial services bill. Its plain text directed the Attorney General to make publicly available all non-privileged, non-grand jury protected documents relating to Jeffrey Epstein and any individuals complicit in or benefiting from his crimes. In everyday language, produce the client list, release the evidence, redact only what the law already requires to protect victims' privacy, and let the public see the rest. The measure first had to pass the House Rules Committee, a gatekeeping panel that decides what receives floor time. It failed there by a party-line vote. The amendment's backers then tried a procedural maneuver to bring the full House into the decision. During that wider vote, 211 members said yay, 210 said nay. But because of parliamentary rules, the question before them was not the amendment itself, but whether to continue debating the underlying bill. That subtle difference allowed leadership to declare the motion lost, killing the amendment for now. In effect, one vote kept the chamber from even discussing Epstein in open session.
Why the resistance? Publicly, some legislators argue that attaching the disclosure mandate to an unrelated cryptocurrency package, the so-called Genesis Act, was procedurally inappropriate. Others claim the Department of Justice already reviewed Epstein's electronic devices, ledgers and notes and found no client list, so forcing a data dump would achieve nothing. Still others contend that premature release could jeopardize ongoing investigations or violate privacy laws, but critics see a more cynical calculation. Powerful figures across the political spectrum may fear their own exposure if unredacted records surface. Adding to the confusion, former President Trump recently asserted that the files do exist but are tainted because, he says, they were compiled under former President Barack Obama and then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, individuals Trump labels untrustworthy. That position muddies earlier Republican talking points that no client list exists at all. Meanwhile, Democratic leadership has shown limited appetite to reopen Epstein's secrets, despite control of the White House and Senate for most of the last 4 years. For victim advocates, the bipartisan reluctance looks less like a clash of ideologies and more like a mutual protection pact.
The stakes are tangible. Court filings in the Virgin Islands civil case against JP Morgan Chase revealed that Epstein moved hundreds of millions of dollars through accounts allegedly used to compensate co-conspirators. Deposition transcripts describe a constant procession of underage girls on his properties. A separate lawsuit against Deutsche Bank claims employees flagged suspicious transfers tied to Epstein as early as 2013, only to see higher-ups override those concerns. If genuine criminal liability reaches boardrooms or campaign donor lists, financial penalties could reach the billions, and criminal trials could alter the public's perception of elite impunity.
Let's pause to consider the victims, many of whom have waited half a lifetime for full recognition of what happened.
Survivors such as Virginia Giuffre, Sarah Ransom, and dozens of Jane Does have testified under oath that Epstein's network supplied them to politicians, business magnates, and royalty. Each time fresh evidence seems poised for release, whether flight logs, appointment books, or sealed grand jury testimony, legal pushback delays or redacts it. The psychological toll of those cycles cannot be overstated. Trauma experts liken the process to institutional gaslighting, in which survivors must repeatedly prove crimes everyone already knows occurred. Some advocates argue that meaningful closure demands not only prosecution, but transparent acknowledgement of who enabled Epstein's abuse. Yet the longer the files remain sealed, the more the public narrative fractures into rumor, partisan weaponry, and internet conspiracy.
Across social media, misinformation thrives. In recent days, anonymous influencers claimed the amendment would have forced the DOJ to release explicit child exploitation footage, an accusation that law scholars quickly debunked. The amendment's language explicitly shielded victim identities and prohibited dissemination of illegal material.
Nevertheless, the false narrative spread fast enough that several legislators cited it as partial justification for their no votes, illustrating how disinformation can shape policy within hours. The age of many political decision makers also fuels public skepticism. Critics ask why octogenarians dominate committees overseeing issues that require technological literacy and cultural awareness of online exploitation. While experience brings institutional memory, generational gaps can hinder urgency on digital era crimes, particularly those that intersect with cryptocurrency, encrypted messaging, and international finance. Younger lawmakers pressing for transparency say entrenched leadership sometimes views them as disruptive rather than diligent.
That generational tension, though less headline-grabbing than partisan brawls, plays a significant role in whether the Epstein files will ever see daylight.
What happens next? Representative Biggs and co-sponsors vow to reintroduce the disclosure mandate as a standalone bill, which would strip away procedural excuses tethered to other legislation. They plan to apply pressure through bipartisan victim rights caucuses and to coordinate with Senate allies willing to champion a companion measure. However, bills forcing DOJ action historically face uphill climbs without support from committee chairs. Positions currently held by members who voted against the amendment. Advocacy groups are therefore shifting focus to state attorneys general, arguing that Epstein's crimes cross multiple jurisdictions and that individual states can compel banks and telecom companies to surrender relevant documents under existing trafficking statutes. Meanwhile, civil litigation grinds forward. A judge in the Southern District of New York has scheduled status conferences for fall 2025 on remaining negligence claims against major financial institutions. Those proceedings could unseal portions of evidence independent of congressional will. If that happens, lawmakers may find themselves responding to disclosures they failed to authorize. Several legal observers compare the scenario to the 2015 FIFA corruption scandal, where US bank subpoenas unveiled bribery networks that sports governing bodies had ignored for years.
Behind the legal jargon, the public's central question is simple. Will anyone, other than Epstein himself and his longtime companion, Ghislaine Maxwell, face criminal consequences? Maxwell received a 20-year federal sentence in 2022, but her appeal argues that sealed testimony naming third parties proves prosecutorial overreach. If an appellate court orders a new trial or resentencing, the Justice Department could confront renewed pressure to reveal whether those unnamed parties were ever investigated. Some former federal prosecutors predict incremental releases, first heavily redacted, then gradually less so, as lawsuits and FOIA requests peel away defenses. Others fear the files will languish indefinitely in bureaucratic purgatory unless whistleblowers leak them, triggering chaotic, unverified data dumps that further erode public trust. For now, transparency remains stalled by a single failed vote. Yet history shows that accountability battles often unfold in waves. Documents once deemed too sensitive, think Pentagon Papers, Church Committee files, or the 9/11 Commission report, ultimately reach the public because determined citizens, journalists, and legislators refuse to quit. Whether Epstein's ledger joins that list depends on the political cost of continued secrecy. If constituents demand persistence through calls, letters, and yes, public comment threads, the calculus in Congress can change swiftly.
That brings us back to you, our viewers. The machinery of justice may appear glacial, but democratic oversight is cumulative. Every question you raise, every verified fact you circulate, and every official you hold accountable adds weight to the scales. When evidence hides behind red tape, sunlight is not a luxury, it is a safeguard. Victims of exploitation deserve no less, and neither does the public, whose faith underwrites our institutions. If tonight's report clarified the labyrinth or sparked a new avenue of inquiry, let the community know below. Your engagement drives the depth of our investigations. Tap like, subscribe to NewsDecoded, and ring the bell so you're first to know when fresh details emerge. Together we follow the facts, however long the path, until the story is fully decoded. Thank you for watching, and stay curious.